So let's have a look at the different arguments in favour of tolerant societies. The first is that they're more likely to lead to moral innovation. So innovation means new and fresh ways of doing things. So J.S. Mill's idea of experiments in living is relevant here, that societies should allow people to try new and fresh ways of doing things. Perhaps we could see the changing role of women as an example of a kind of moral innovation. So as women took up roles outside of the their traditional roles within the family, within the domestic sphere, then that enabled the whole society to develop. This point is quite similar really to the second one, which is that tolerant societies are more likely to be dynamic and adaptable. And in a globalized society, this is increasingly important. If countries are going to be successful in this new globalized world, then being able to change and adapt to new situations is incredibly important. So intolerant societies, again, are more stuck with traditional ways of doing things and are less likely to be able to adapt to new situations. There's also a utilitarian argument for tolerant societies, which is very simply that they make people happier. So utilitarianism argues that all actions should be considered by this benchmark. Does it lead to the greatest happiness for the greatest number? And by allowing people more freedom, by allowing people more liberty, then that in the whole will make people happier, lead to a happier society. And this again is something that J.S. Mill argued. A more Kantian argument for tolerant societies is that they acknowledge that people are autonomous centres of value. In other words, that people are self-governing. And it's important that people are able to really make choices, really make decisions about how they should live if they're to be respected as ends in themselves, as Kant argues, rather than simply treated as a means to an end. This argument also comes from J.S. Mill, the argument from fallibility, and Mill argues that if we are intolerant, particularly in the realm of speech, if we don't let others freely express their ideas, we're assuming an infallibility, we're assuming that we cannot be wrong. When we acknowledge that even though we do our best to say things that are true and honest, that we can be wrong, we're capable of getting things wrong, then we will be tolerant towards other views and be much more respectful of freedom of speech. Another argument is that it just doesn't work to force people to have particular views. Coercion is ineffective. If we think of the example of freedom of religion, here this is an example of how this might work. So somebody could perhaps force you to say you believed in a particular religion, to force you to behave in a particular way, but to actually affect your real heart and mind, what you really believe deep down, arguably coercion just is an ineffective way of doing it. People might go along with your wishes as long as the coercion was present, but as soon as your back was turned, literally or metaphorically, then they go and do what they wanted to do. Tolerant societies also arguably are a way of dealing with the threat posed by strife. So if you've got two very, very different views, in very simple terms you could say, well, we've got a choice. Do we agree to get along even though we have our differences? Or do we insist on saying, no, I'm right and I need to destroy and eliminate the alternative? So tolerance is seen as a very effective alternative to fighting, conflict and strife in society. Tolerance also is a way of embracing this value of diversity, of richness, of difference. And if we think how our society is so much richer for all of the different cultural influences, all of the different religious influences that we have. And we can see again, this is a kind of diversity that flourishes with tolerance. Intolerant societies who feel very negative about people who are different, people who don't go along with traditional ways of doing things, are much less likely to have the diversity and the richness that brings to all of us. So that basically brings to an end some arguments in favour of tolerant societies. Of course, as in everything in philosophy, there are counter-arguments, arguments against too, and we'll be exploring that in the next session.